Hi, everyone. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-apologist.com. And today I have G-Man with me, and possibly Veckel will be with us in a little bit. Actually, I just got a little knock on the door, it looks like. So possibly Veckel is joining right now. Let me check. No, not right now. Okay, so what we're going to do today is really exciting. We're going to review something that is from Frank Turek and David Silverman. So we're going to go over to Frank Turek's channel, which is called, actually, what is his channel called? I forgot. So I'll have to click on it. And we're going to do that. So actually, why am I hearing myself? Hold on one second. Somehow I've got a, let me just see, somehow.
Let me mute to see if it's me.
Why is this still? Aha, I see the problem. Okay, sorry. Sorry, everybody. A little problem there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put this up on the screen. The Frank Turek, David, we'll start with right about, I think he starts right, let me see where he starts.
42 minutes.
Right about 42. Well, let's start it. I see he's actually in here just a little bit before that. So let me see. His big argument is God of the gaps. And so got it on pause. so his big argument is God of the gaps. And G-Man and I are going to take it down. And when Veckel joins, he's going to also be helping us take it down. So let me go ahead and share the screen so we can get this going. Okay, wait, somehow I didn't.
There we go.
Okay, there's David. So I want to say before we start this, and it's Cross-Examined is the name of Frank Turek's station, or his YouTube channel, if you want to call it that. Before we start this, I want to say that we're just doing this out of the public domain. We're hoping that Dr. Turek and Mr. Silverman won't mind the fact that we're going to review their video. And I just want to say, if you have the time, it's a really long video, it's over 2 hours, go back and listen to the whole thing. Because I would say we're not going to listen to Dr. Turek's stuff as much because he did just a solid knockdown performance. But we're going to sort of supplement some of the things that he said. And so that's our big plan for today. And so sound good, G-Man?
Sounds great. Let's do this.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure we got sound on the computer. Okay, so we're getting the computer sound and okay, here we go. Let's just double check. Okay. Whoop. Okay. So we're going to start off with Mr. Silverman. Now, in case you don't know who this man is, he is the former president of American Atheists. He's got a lot of renown because of that. He majored in marketing, and you can tell he majored in marketing because one of the things that we noticed that he did when he was with the American Atheists is he really got a lot of attention for it, and he even showed up on the O'Reilly channel. So he made a name for himself and brought a lot of attention and donations to American Atheists. But then apparently he got in some sort of a squabble with the board of American Atheists, and it had something to do with Matt Dillahunty. And so they asked him to step down.
We won't talk about that today. I'll do that on my YouTube channel a little later.
Yeah, we want to keep it clean.
Yeah.
So, okay, so here we go. Let's listen. And just tell me, G-Man, if you want us to stop or pause or anything, just let me know, and I'll pause it too.
I'm pretty sure me and you are going to be at the same mind listening to him.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so here we go.
And then we learned. Then we started to test. Then we started to think. Then we started to rationalize. And what we found out was that the trees actually don't change color because of a man in the sky. And yes, it is a man in the sky that we're talking about. They actually have a physical reason, a chemical reason to change colors. The rain actually is following the laws of physics, as is the thunder and the lightning. So the space for God gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And it has gotten smaller dramatically over the past 50 years. And what we have as a result is a very, very small God that exists today in one place, really. The God of the gaps exists before the beginning of the universe. We've got it all the rest straightened out. We know all the rest. And what we've got is a God that's out there that we can't answer yet. That's the God of the gaps, and that's what we're talking about. God of the gaps simply means
argument. And an argument is a specific kind of thing. I want you to think of.
Whoa, sorry. Veckel's in the house. Veckel's here, everybody.
All right. I just want to say something real quick for those of you who know what the God of the gaps is. I forget the Christian that came up with this argument. I forget his actual name, but the argument itself was made because for like deists and for people that tried to like put God in the things that we couldn't understand. The reason why the God of the gaps don't primarily work with us Christians is because he did it all. You understand what I'm saying? Like if you look at the definition of what a gap is, okay, if you look at what the word all is, and if God does it all, then the God of the gap is irrelevant to Christianity. You can use that with the deists, because deists will tell you that, you know, God started off the universe and then left it alone or whatever, right? That God would be the cause, but then I guess he put evolution into motion or whatever. That's what you would do with the God of the gaps. You know what I mean? But you can't do that with Christianity because we're going to say that God did it all. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, and Frank Turek said, he made a pretty good point after that. He said, you know, God of the gaps is about what we don't know. And he said and Frank Turek had given arguments for what we do know. And so if you look at the characteristics of the universe, for example, and the cosmos and the teleological argument and things like the fact that DNA has 3.5 billion well-ordered, what they call letters. And I put it on Twitter, I said, that's equivalent to saying, if you think that is just written down in this specific ordering, and you think that's all just pretend, then you would basically be saying the same thing as the Gospels or the entire Bible of the well-ordered lettering was written by nobody. Nobody wrote the Bible. It just pops into existence.
And let me say this, Frank and Mr. Silverman's, David Silverman's argument depends upon, like, you know, human beings being really stupid during the days of Jesus, you know, in the days of the apostles. Like they didn't know anything about farming. They knew nothing about bricks. They knew nothing about plants or anything like that. If you actually read the Bible, a lot of the allegories and the analogies that are used is made primarily towards farmers. You understand what I'm saying? So they know a lot about pigmentation, sowing and reaping, how to prune something. Like he's not saying anything like. Actually, let me say that toward the end. But it's important for people to know that when you're reading your Bible, that you're talking about people who was in farming. So when he's talking about that, well, you know, now we know why trees change pigmentation. You know, it wasn't the God in the air. First of all, these same farmers would have given God the glory, and they would still have known why these plants would have changed color and why some of them were bigger or taller or stronger and why certain things happened. You know what I mean? So it's kind of silly for any atheist to sit there and try to argue that you know, our answer for everything is God, 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 God. Sometimes we do like to break it down and explain to you how things actually happen, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's actually almost comical that a lot of them try to say that the people of the Bronze Age, they call them, you know, ancient goat herders and that kind of thing. And they try to disparage them. And it's almost like they cherry pick because they ignore people like Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and all of the other large-minded people who lived back then. And so it's silly to say that the people were dumber than we are. It's just not even backed up.
If you ask me, we're actually getting dumber like as time goes on. You know what I mean? In the sense that, I mean, I'm not saying like we don't like we don't know chemistry, we don't know like, you know, like trigonometry and things like that. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about in the sense that we don't use as much wisdom, I think, as people used in the Old Testament times as today. You know? Yeah,
wisdom and humility, and so that's the deal. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit more here.
In the laws of physics, as is the thunder and the lightning. So the space for God gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And it has gotten smaller dramatically over the past 50 years. And what we have as a result is a very, very small God that exists today in one place, really. The God of the gaps exists before the beginning of the universe. We've got it all the rest straightened out. We know all the rest. And what we've got is a God that's out there that we can't answer yet. That's the God of the gaps, and that's what we're talking about now. God of the gaps simply means, I don't know. I was on Bill O'Reilly a little while ago. He gave me this great line. He said, tide goes in, the tide goes out. You can't explain it. And that was his proof of God. You can't explain that.
Can you mute this?
His gotcha line.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you're gonna need to strongly moderate me because this is just irritating listening to this. So let me get this straight here. If because one of the things that they like to ask us is, you know, like how did God like go about making the animals? Like what was the integral details about that, right? One of the things that Beckel said to me a long time ago, and he's right about this, and it's in the Bible, and it says that the secret things belong to God. There are some things he's not going to explain to us. You know what I mean? And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with accepting it, right? There are some things I don't know how God did some things. It doesn't mean that he didn't do it. But SJ, how many times have you ever talked to an evolutionist, right? And you start asking them, how did the single cell that supposedly that supposedly multiplied or whatever in that primordial soup survived and became a multi-cell? They haven't seen it. They didn't witness it. But if you act, well, just because we don't know doesn't mean it didn't happen. Well, if that's true for you, then why why isn't it true for us? That is so hypocritical. It's not even funny.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, and actually, I just saw something from the Royal Society where they talked about all of the problems that they have with the theory of evolution. They've still not resolved a number of different issues, and they haven't resolved, for example, how during the Cambrian explosion, how all of these different animal species came about. They haven't gotten all the transitional fossils that they claim, and they have a lot of questions outstanding. And so I'll even put a link to the article I read on that, because they actually detailed exactly some of the major problems with the theory. And so they have a lot of faith. They believe that this all came about from primordial soup, or it all came about from these underwater ocean currents. And I mean, there's different theories that are out there, but they really haven't backed them up with a lot of empirical support. And so that's a bit of an issue. And another thing is that David Silverman is claiming here is that God's gotten smaller. I just want to give two things that I heard. One was my friend Jansen. Jansen's on Twitter, and he said that when he started coming back to Christianity, he said he heard the audible words of God right around the same time that the Twin Towers had occurred, right around 9/11. He heard the audible words of God tell him to go to Isaiah 30:25. And so he went to Isaiah 30:25, and you know what he heard? I'm going to pull this exact verse up. Hold on one second. You guys are going to love this. Oh, there it is. Okay, Isaiah 30:25 just happens to say this. In the day of great slaughter, when the towers fall, streams of water will flow on every high mountain and every lofty hill. When the towers fall. Can you believe that? So he heard that. And he wasn't even really reading the Bible back then. And then another thing that happened to another friend of mine, his name's Phil, and he wrote a book. It's really good. I recommend you guys watch it. It's on Exodus. It's bringing the life out of Exodus, basically. And Phil had this experience where he knows a guy who, when he was 10 years old, this guy got in a really bad car accident, and he was pushed out of the car essentially, and he landed right onto the pavement. His entire face was completely messed up to a point where they thought they'd have some major reconstructive surgery. And he went in there, and as they were doing the surgery, suddenly he felt like this presence of complete and utter peace. And he looked over and he saw a figure with a head of light, essentially, and wearing a white robe. And he didn't realize who that was. He thought it was his guardian angel. He told his mom about it. His mom said, well, that was God. And essentially the figure, basically, they've cleared him. They thought that he would have all this reconstructive surgery needed, but somehow he was miraculously cleaned up, where all they needed to fix was a little bit on his nose. And so these kind of miracles happening, I mean, there's all kinds of things still happening today to give us some pretty good evidence. So I think David is without merit in saying all this stuff. And see, I can see Veckel now.
his microphone's muted, so.
Oh yeah, okay. So you guys want to go ahead and listen to some more?
Yes.
All right, here we go.
You can't explain that. Therefore, the invisible magic man in the sky is real. That was his logic. That is your logic. You're finding ways to do it. So you talked about first cause. This is the epitome of the God of the gaps. How did the universe come to be? I don't know. Therefore, God did it. A God did it.
Just in case people don't know what this argument is, it basically says at the beginning, time, space, and matter. Wait, I'm sorry. How does that go? Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. The cause must be with qualities that weren't around. So time, space, and matter began to exist. So the cause has to be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, and also omnipotent and intentional. And so that points us to a theistic God. And so it doesn't necessarily point to the Christian God, but it definitely gives us pointing to a theistic God who's omnipotent and intentional.
And then they put words in our mouth, S.J., where he says, I don't know. I don't know any Christians that answer that way. We have it in Genesis 1 where it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Exactly. Who says I don't know?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you 110%, G-Man. No Christian says, I don't know, and put a little God in it. You know, if you're a Christian, you are taking a position, you're making the positive position that God is the one who brought these things to pass. That's it. You're not saying, I don't know, maybe God did it, or I don't know, we'll just use God as a door stopper until we find out what the truth is. No Christian thinks that way.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, they kind of glorify saying, I don't know. Have you noticed that? Like, I think Mac Dillahunt, he's kind of really proud when they say a lot of I don't knows. And I was thinking as a teacher, if I got a lot of that from my students, I'd be very frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, well, what do you know?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, what if they,
mean...
rather than answering all the test questions, they could just write, I don't know.
Now, if you did that, he would fail.
Yeah, that's not going to work. So, okay.
Just like when it comes to what do they call it? The similarity that brought about the
singularity.
What is it? What is it called?
The singularity.
A singular. Oh, I said similarity. Yeah, well, the singularity. Yeah, they don't know where that came from, but that's the one thing that caused everything to explode and bring about all life and everything else that exists. So, but where did that?
You know what's funny about a singularity, though, Beckel? You know what's funny about that? If you ask them where the singularity come from, I remember Boom, Martin, and a few people said you get a singularity when a star collapses or when a star dies, and it turns into a singularity. Some of them have said that when a star dies, it becomes a black hole and it becomes a singularity. Yeah. So then you got to ask where did the star come from?
Yeah, exactly. Where does it come from? Where does that come from? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
You see, some of them try to get out of this argument by, like Aaron Ra, he would say, well, we're part of a multiverse, but we have no evidence to suggest we're part of a multiverse. So that's a faith-based position.
Somebody's been reading way too many comics.
It's dishonest to assert as fact something that cannot be evidentially true.
Yeah. So but the other argument as far as the multiverse goes is basically saying, well, that doesn't stop the fact that there has to be a start date for the multiverse too. If there's another universe or 10 other universes, they all had to have start dates. So it doesn't get rid of our problem here of what preceded this whole cause. So, okay, here we go.
Let's get back to David Strawman.
Specifically my God.
Strawman.
Although the exact same thing could be used for any God. The exact same thing could be used for the invisible unicorn that I just made up just now.
Oh, brother.
Look, this water bottle. How did the universe come? The water bottle did it. It's the same logic. It's the same reasoning.
It's definitely not the same logic. It's same reasoning. What?
Same reasoning. Yeah.
All right, so let's go.
How did he get to be the president?
Simply moves the question out one level. We don't know where the universe began. That's not good enough for the theists. They say, well, God did it. Well, okay, where did God begin? And you just heard him right now say, well, we don't have to worry about that because God is special. God is outside of time. So it basically takes the question, moves it out one level, and ignores the question. There's no answer there. The design argument.
What'd you say?
This is terrible, man. I can't believe this was an atheist.
Oh my God. You know what? Actually, you got some atheists.
This guy was revered.
Oh my.
Oh, you should see him. He is famous. He's written books about how he writes books about how God doesn't exist. He puts all of his energy into talking about how God doesn't exist. And like David Wood said, it's really kind of curious how somebody who doesn't believe in God and values his time on earth and thinks that the time is so important would spend all of their time talking about God.
Well, hey, I don't know, G-Man, you would know more than I would. What time does the Atheist Experience come on TV?
Oh, it comes on Sunday.
Yeah, what
at
time?
5.
At 5?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
They begin church at 5 o'clock.
Every Sunday for the past decade, So, but no God.
They're dedicated.
Yeah, right.
They're dedicated to their cause.
Religion, I tell you.
Hey, real quick, have you seen his debate with James White? It was on the issue of morality.
You
No,
talking about David Silverman versus James
Yeah,
White?
he did a terrible job there too. Gosh, oh, it was horrendous.
I bet you James White retired him, right? That's probably the last debate he ever had, right?
You might be. I heard he got fired from the AAA too, I guess, but I'm not sure.
Yo, Becco, I found out why. I can't tell you on air because of this shit.
Okay.
I gotta tell you why he's no longer the president.
oh, actually, if anyone wants to see that, I can even link to that because that's from Steve McRae's video. Steve McRae did an interview with David, and David gave all the details, and it's not pretty.
Yo, I'm calling his experience as soon as I get this. Say, Matt, yo, I gotta talk to you.
Hook me with that link.
Oh my gosh, G-Man, if you do that. No.
I want to see the link now.
Oh man, I'll put the link in here. It's definitely, it's bad. Okay, so it's yeah, it's too.
Silverman needs to go see a doctor. That's what he needs.
As soon as my kids sometimes listen to my channel, I don't want my kids seeing.
I know. All right. We're not gonna talk about
Oh, that bad, huh? Oh wow.
Oh yeah, very
really
bad.
Okay.
Shoot, now everybody's like, get off my channel and go. So you guys will have, it's entertaining. I mean, it's not entertaining. It's just bad. Okay, so here we go.
Love the design argument. Look at the beautiful sky, look at the grass, look at the measurements of the universe. Why does the universe look like this? I don't know. Must be God. A God. Specifically my God, your God, or the water bottle. Now, let's put.
So I just want to mention something as far as this argument is, if anyone hasn't read it yet, you have to go read Hugh Ross's books about the universe, because he's identified 10 habitable zones that only the Earth, out of all the planets that they've seen with the Hubble and identified, only the Earth actually has all 10 habitable zones achieved for life to be possible, for advanced life to be possible like ours. And other planets, the closest other planet that we can see that has met 2 habitable zones. So we have things like the moon is a particular size. The Jupiter, because Jupiter is where it is, it actually deflects a lot of meteors and asteroids and things like that from hitting us. There's all of these different things with the tides and that sort of thing. So I would highly recommend going and looking at Hugh Ross's arguments, because it basically points to how we're in such a Goldilocks position, and some people who've looked at all of this information have figured there must be somebody stacking the deck here. It's really unbelievable, the chances that we would have achieved these 10 habitable zones in this Goldilocks position in the Milky Way galaxy, which is shaped in a particular way to allow for advanced life. So there's some really good arguments to that.
Let me actually read this bottom part. It says design argument. Why does the universe look or act like this? I don't know. So a God did it. Now, please understand, if you're watching this is not what me and Becca would tell somebody. All right, we're not gonna say, I don't know, so a God did it. We're gonna tell you, the reason why the universe looks like this and acts like this is because your father my father who's in heaven, hallowed be his name, created the universe for himself and for us to enjoy it. All right, that is why he did it. And I'm not saying I think he did it. I'm telling you why I know he did it. Right. All right, and I can tell you that the universe is designed and that it did not happen by random processes. And if I start questioning you on your randomness, on your supposed singularity that expanded, we got to talk about the laws of nature. We got to talk about a lot of different things, and you're going to come to, I don't know, it doesn't mean that your God did it. You know what I mean? So. Like,
also the arrogance at the very end here says you could design better. How many times have we heard atheists, try to use that as a challenge to our faith, saying, okay, what about the octopus eye? What about the human's eye compared to this creature? What about our human anatomy? If God is perfect and stuff like that, and he designed us the way we're supposed to be, why all these issues here? If I was designing a human, I would have done blah blah blah. I would have done much better, yada yada yada. And it just shows utter arrogance on their part, and they're totally excluding the fact that these things are done on purpose. So it's not that God. First of all, the Bible doesn't teach that God makes any type of mistakes. First of all right, and we have valid explanations as to why you see sickness, deformities, mutations, so on and so forth in life. Okay, we have an explanation for that. It's not because God screwed up or or anything like that, So, but they don't want to hear that though. They just yeah.
Let's talk about that a minute. What is a sickness at the end of the day? You know what I mean? Because honestly, the sickness argument, if they never come to me with that, because if they do, they'll get destroyed. But think about this a minute. And we got a college professor here, and she'll correct me if I'm wrong, right? Why does a sickness exist to begin with? That means our body is suffering from dis-ease. This is where we get our word from. The word disease is really dis-ease. That our body is malfunctioning because we have something in our body or something that's going on with our body that is not normal or something that is making us sick or ill, right? And then there are remedies for it, right? If God didn't exist, actually, I don't know if I would say it that way, but if we didn't have diseases, right? Because of the things of our environment, like for example, God specifically tells us in the Bible that we're not supposed to eat certain things because if we do, it's going to make our bodies react a certain way or whatever. It would be considered unclean or whatever, right? Like if you eat too much pork, too much cholesterol, you eat too much of this, too much honey, your blood pressure will go up, right? And your body you can get a disease from eating too much honey and whatnot, right? That's not an argument for God not existing. That's an argument for human beings being foolish. Like a lot of them don't even understand what sickness is. And then you're right, Becca, what you said in the latter part of this, where it says Earth is 15% habitable and 3% water is drinkable, you could design better. What I would challenge the evolutionists to do is this. Why do you believe the planet has so much salt water on the planet? What happens when that salt water, if you know anything about the environment, what happens when the salt water evaporates? What does it turn into? You understand what I'm saying? It turns into rain, which goes into our reservoirs and turns into drinkable water for us. You know what I mean? If all of the water was clean and pure and it got polluted, we would be in trouble. Yeah, you understand what I'm saying?
And the only reason why they could say I could design better is because you're already taking a pre-existing idea or a pre-existing something that already exists. Mm-hmm. You're just trying to think that you have a means to modify it. But I mean, right. look at man now. I mean, every time you see a piece of machinery or some sort of a new electronic, there's always some sort of glitch with it. It's never 100% invulnerable to any type of external elements to it.
Right.
One thing, just if you look at this particular argument that he's making an argument that like if there's a cracked tile in your bathroom, then nobody built the house.
Wait, say that again?
If there's a cracked tile in your bathroom, that means nobody built the house.
If there's a cracked tile in your
house. That's true though, because he's saying that the house has mistakes in it. And because the house has mistakes, and that means no intelligence was involved in it.
Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, now I understand. Yeah.
So you see how ludicrous that is?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, my house shook on the foundation. Essentially, that means there's no builder.
Right.
But here's the thing, SJ. You want to get on their nerves, SJ?
It just came out of
even if the house wasn't built correctly, doesn't mean that there wasn't a builder. It could just mean that your builder wasn't all that good. So it doesn't disprove God. It's a horrible argument.
Right.
A horrible one.
Oh, it's a ridiculous argument. And it's just, if you look at the earth, actually, if you look at some of the beautiful nature on earth and things like that, it gives us a general revelation of God, the mountains, the seas, it's absolutely gorgeous. Compare our planet to what we've seen on other planets. The other ones look pretty bad, and because he made this one for us. And so people don't like that, but that's true. And Brian Stevens, I see that you asked about what if there's life on other planets? Well, we have no evidence. So that's a faith-based position. We haven't found any evidence of life on other planets, advanced life.
Yeah, somebody asked me that a while back. I know you want to get back to the video, but somebody asked me that a long time ago. Actually, it was Eve, G-Man. You remember Eve. Eve asked me that question, and the answer was really quick, and the conversation ended like in a matter of seconds. She asked me, what if you find out tomorrow that there's life on other planets? I said, oh, okay, that would still validate God exists. That means he created them too.
God just didn't want us to know about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against the fact that there could be aliens on another planet, but until you give me some sort of evidence, I got to think it's a faith-based position saying there are aliens on other planets.
Exactly. Yep.
So, yeah, I need evidence, atheists. I need to get some evidence. All right, here we go.
Put some design perspective on this. The universe has about 1 trillion stars, not trillions and trillions of stars, 1 trillion stars, many with planets. 99.99999% dead. And if you took all those planets and all the stars and the plasma and everything and put it into one, that total is 5% of the universe.
That's big.
The other 95% of the universe is either dark matter or dark energy, which is 100% dead. The Earth is 15% habitable by humans. It's 75% water, but only 3% of the water is drinkable. So I think everybody here, if you had the power to design a planet, you could do better. The answer is
there is plenty of water as far as fresh water goes. There's plenty of fresh water for all living beings that's on the planet. We don't need 50% of the planet to have pure drinking water. It's not necessary. Whoever designed the Earth clearly understood that. And obviously, if Mr. Silverman would have done the planet, he was like, okay, I want to make 50% of the world drinkable water, and 50% of it's going to be salt water. And that means that whales will have even less places to swim than they have right now. You know, like seriously, stop it.
Yeah, and I want to add to what you're saying as far as the water percentages. That's actually one of the habitable zones that Hugh Ross has pointed out. We actually need the exact percentage of water on this planet to be able to sustain life. So he's actually looked into that as an astronomer. So people would be well advised to go look at his books on this, because he spells it all out in very scientific ways that I don't really understand completely.
Is David Silverman a scientist?
No, he actually studied in business. I looked up his background. He studied in business, international business and marketing.
You know, he's lucky he's not debating a presuppositionalist and an informed one. If Scientific Brunicape debated him, he'll be dead, because Scientific will be like, well, could you be wrong about everything that you know about science? You know what I mean? And if he doesn't have any degree in biology or anything like that, or chemistry or anything like that, then all he's got to do is say, okay, prove to me that the water percentages are incorrect.
Yeah.
He's done after that. He's done. Like honestly, like if Scientific Brunicape debated him, he wouldn't even need to go through all of that. He'd just say, well, could you be wrong? He'd be like, no. And then I'd be like, okay, fine. You obviously don't believe that 75%, 25% is a good ratio. So can you do me a favor and explain scientifically what would the correct ratio be? If he even opens his mouth to even try to answer that question, people will laugh at him. Because obviously we've been doing just fine with this ratio. And then remember this, Eshen, before the flood, a lot of theologians speculate that the ratio that we have today wasn't always that ratio. We don't know how salty the water was in the days of Noah. And I looked this up scientifically. The scientists don't know 6,000 years ago or 8,000 years ago how salty the water was. Nor do they know how to determine the ratio or on how salty the water can get from year to year and whatnot. I questioned them about this, and they have. As a matter of fact, I debated on Modern Day Debate, and I asked them. I said, "Tell me what the ratio of how salty the water was during the days of Noah," and they didn't know. I said, "Explain to me the science behind it." He didn't know. I had to explain to him how you can have a freshwater fish, and you can very slowly put salt in the water, like every year, for a little bit, and a little bit, and a little bit, and a little bit, and eventually the fish will adapt to the salt water. You understand what I'm saying? So his argument doesn't make no sense. What he's doing, he's taking everything at face value, and he's not doing any studying or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I again, everybody should also go read Hugh Ross's Improbable Planet, because he talks about the atmospheric conditions that we have today that are very attuned to human life to be able to prosper. And so if we didn't have these particular atmospheric conditions, which took many, many years to put together on the earth, because it's over time, different minerals, plants, different kinds of things developed to contribute to the atmosphere. So the conditions today are pretty much optimal. So, and there's a couple points that he's going to make, and I don't know if he's going to make it in this thing, but I want to point out two things. Well, actually, I'll just wait till he gets to it, because I think he said it, but he's going to talk about Psalm 137, but he's going to take it out of context and not actually explain what was in Psalm 137. And he's also going to talk about something Hugh Ross has shown. And I think that's going to be about the light before dark. And so I'm going to get to that too. So here we go.
If this universe was designed, it was designed very poorly and definitely not for us. I love the moral argument too, because the moral argument presupposes itself. Who invented objective morality? Must be God. Except there is no objective morality. It's all relative. Frank showed a picture of the Holocaust victims. He didn't mention that the Holocaust, that the SS troops that put those Jews there had Gott mit uns, God is with us, on their belt buckles.
See, that's such a cheap, low shot. It's one of those things that was a carryover from World War I that they had those belt buckles. It wasn't, because you cannot try to make a claim that Hitler or any of his followers actually believed a Jewish carpenter existed and he'd be held accountable to them. They were using it as a ploy to try to appeal to Christians and to try to act as if, again, the Aryan race was superior. And clearly this is objectively morally wrong, what happened during the Nazis' time. And so by David saying it's all relative, he's just like Frank Turek's going to point out later, he's not in a position to even make a judgment on what happened in the Nazi culture.
Well, there's something I want to say about this. It's kind of funny that anytime we see the word God, it automatically means a Christian God. You know, atheists are always reminding us like how they're the most intelligent people on the planet and everyone else out there is stupid and whatnot, right? Last time I checked, between paganism, I won't even mention Christianity. Let's look at paganism, Greek mythologism, mythologism or whatever, and various other religions out there. Do you know how many different versions of a God is out there? You understand what I'm saying? So when Adolf Hitler, and the Nazis were wearing this belt and it says that God is with us, what God are they talking about? It doesn't mean that they're talking about the God of the Bible. You understand what I'm saying? I don't want to argue with you guys on here, but in God we trust on the back of our dollars, you know, with that pyramid, you know what I mean? And with that all-seeing eye in the back. I don't believe that's talking about the God of the Bible. I don't know what you guys believe. I don't believe that's talking about the God of the Bible. But all I know is just because somebody says that, you know, that they're speaking for God doesn't mean that they're talking about the Bible. And you want proof of this? Go get a book called Morals and Dogmas. It was a book written by Albert Pike, I think. He was a Freemason or whatever. And go look at who he thinks God is. He believes that Lucifer is God. Just because somebody calls something or someone a God doesn't mean they're talking about the God of the Bible. And atheists just seem to be obsessed with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They seem to be obsessed with him. Get the other gods out there. They're the demonic angels that are posing as gods. I should probably say that. But they seem to be obsessed with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah, I noticed that too, and that is a good point, because if it's my neighbor in my school, he's a Hindu, and he always talks about praying to God, and of course he's referring to his Hindu gods, and so you have to know there's a distinction there, so that is important. Yeah. So.
But if the atheist heard your friend say that, he might think that he's talking about the God of the Bible.
Yeah, that's true. So and there's also, just like my Muslim friends, they say they pray to God, they refer to Allah as God too in the United States. And so it could be their reference to Allah, which is, in case anybody's wondering, that's not the same God as our God. Okay, so Allah, Muhammad basically said that Jesus was never crucified, that God took him to heaven prior to the crucifixion. So a lot of Muslims believe that some other guy took Jesus's place. Nobody recognized that, and nobody, and he didn't protest the fact that they were crucifying him unjustly. So
let me ask you a question, Eshe. Madame Blavatsky, what was she involved in again? What was the society that she was involved in again?
I'm not sure, Madam.
Beckel, you talk about how some Calvinists believe in that stuff, right? With Madame Blavatsky.
I heard that name so many times, but I've never gotten around to doing
Adolf
it.
Hitler was obsessed with that woman. Adolf Hitler was obsessed with her, and I forget what it was called, but Hitler studied a lot of the works made by her, and I forget what it was called though. But she worshipped Lucifer too.
Oh yeah, you have to know he worshipped Lucifer. I mean, that's very clear. I think maybe he didn't realize he was worshiping Lucifer, but all of his actions are completely in line with something Lucifer would have enjoyed.
You're talking about Hitler, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Hitler. The reason why some atheists think that Adolf Hitler was a Christian, which is absolutely astounding to me, is because of that one statement. I think you guys already talked about it before. Is something on his belt buckle.
It's God with us, essentially.
But if anything, from what I understood, he followed a thing called what's called, and it's not what you think it is, but it's called positive Christianity or something like that. And basically, it was essentially a very very anti-Jewish sentiment version of Christianity, if you will. Very diluted, very polluted, distorted version of Christianity. So it got rid of everything that was Jewish about the Old and the New Testament. It was disregarded by people who followed this position.
Oh, that sounds like one of those ancient positions. There was somebody who did that. They only believed the book of Luke and some of the epistles. I'm trying to remember the name of that person from the ancient past.
Theosophy, that's what it's called. It's called theosophy. That's what she pushed. It was a theosophy. Theosophy, yeah. Theosophy. And Adolf Hitler was deeply into the occult because the swastika was supposed to be a very occultish too. I don't have all that information in front of me, but he was deep into the occult.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that would prove that we have objective morality is the fact that what our conscience does. So God implanted a conscience inside of us. Romans 2:15 makes that clear, but God implanted a conscience in all of us. And so the only way Hitler was able to get away with what he did was he dehumanized the Jewish people by equating them with rats in a lot of his propaganda videos. He dehumanized them. And so he was able to try to convince his soldiers that they didn't deserve to live, essentially, by pretending they weren't humans, because it's in our conscience to say, wait a second, that is wrong. What he did to all of those people is just morally wrong. We have an objective standard that people are entitled to life, people are entitled to freedom, people are entitled to equality, people are considered equal under the eyes of God. We hold that truth to be self-evident here in the United States. So
evolution teaches that we're animals, so I don't know if we're any higher than rats, but you know, they teach we're related to them, though. We should tell you where their thinking is, you know.
I always like the people who always like to go around talking about themselves as apes and monkeys, and I think to myself, why are you pretending that humans are on the same level as these animals? I mean, humans are exceptional. So humans are at a different level. We can think, we can reason, we can do all of these great things that we don't see evidence of animals doing. And there's some guy, like when I had that one guy on my channel, what's his name? I'm forgetting, David Smalley. David's like, well, you know, I saw an octopus and one time it scurried across I'm like, oh my gosh, is that the same?
But let's get more to his nonsense, because this guy keeps on giving.
Did it in the name of God. They thought they were being objectively moral. Their idea of objective morality allowed them to do the atrocities. There is no objective morality. It is all opinion, all of it. That doesn't make us lack of free will. It simply makes us responsible for making our own decisions. We, as a society, make the judgments. Now,
enjoy the lake of fire.
Preference is also something we get a lot of. Wouldn't you prefer it if it was a God? And believe me, I would.
Would you?
I want to live forever. I want you all to live forever. I want to see my mother again, my father, my grandmother. Preference. Your comfort level. How would it be if it wasn't a God? Completely irrelevant questions. Your choice, your preference are relevant as to whether or not there is a man in the sky. So let's talk about atheism.
Pause. Yeah. You know what he's doing? Romans chapter 1 says this, and this is what this guy's doing. And thank you, Mr. Silverman, because you just validated this. You're suppressing information at this point. I mean, that's irrelevant. It would be very important for us to know whether or not there was a God out there that created us and had a purpose for us and wanted us to live a certain way. What do you mean it's irrelevant? You know what I mean?
It's the most relevant thing we could possibly know.
Exactly. It would be more relevant than knowing how to make liquid nitrogen or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, who cares? Like if God exists and he wants us to live a certain way and he's telling us there are consequences for our actions and there are rewards for our actions, and we had better pay attention to what this guy is saying. And you know what? I'm going to mute my microphone for the rest of this because I'm going to go off on this guy in a minute. What do you mean that's irrelevant? Oh my God, man. Oh. You think I'm bad? Wait till you say something to trigger Beckel. You'll see. Oh, Lord.
It's going to trigger us. All right, let's go.
Let's talk about real learning. The first cause is very simple. We don't really know.
There we go again.
We have some good ideas. We put together some formulas, and some very smart people are putting together some real good research. But there's an important lesson in the first cause. I don't know is a fair and reasonable answer. It is also the truth. I'm here telling you the truth. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang. He doesn't either.
Liar, liar, liar.
Design. You know, we are well aware today of all the laws of physics that control everything from snowflakes to galaxy clusters. We got all that down. We don't need God for any of that. That's where the God of the gaps comes in. We don't need God for anything. But in all of our research, we have never found any evidence ever supporting anything supernatural.
Okay, mute.
See, he's selective amnesia, it's almost like. I'm sure he's probably seen some of the evidence, at least with respect to Jesus. And I think we've got very clear evidence that Jesus resurrected. When we look at all of the minimal facts and we put them together, the best explanation is he resurrected. We also have miracles that have happened today, but of course they don't acknowledge those.
For those of you out there who are like me and you do construction and you're ripping what's left of your hair out your head, let me break this down for you in English so you can understand what this guy was actually saying, all right? What he was saying is this: just because we know we understand that that we can make concrete with sand and mortar, you know what I mean, and certain other chemicals, doesn't mean that we don't need to know who actually built the house. It's like, what? That's the dumbest thing that a person can get on the stage and actually suggest. Just because I know the chemical elements of Elmer's glue and how glue works doesn't mean I don't need to know who the manufacturer is. What? For those of you who got warranties, you know what I'm talking about. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah.
Dragnut tried to make a similar argument with me a few years ago. The argument, in my opinion, was very, very stupid, very futile. He says, I know about a contradiction in the Bible. I says, all right, go ahead, pick one. And then he said, well, let's start with Genesis. Okay, let's go with Genesis. And then his his argument was the fact that, the part in Genesis 3 where it talks about how Adam and Eve were created from the dust of the ground. He said that that's scientifically inaccurate. I was like, oh, okay. Why you say that? He says, because we're not actually made from dirt. I says, okay. But and then he used some sort of scientific term like petroleum or something like that, and tried to say, this is what, if they were actually made from dirt, then this is what they would look like. Blah, 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 blah. I says, oh my gosh, really? I said, so you don't really, see, you realize this is the Bible, okay? And they're writing it. It's not a science book. He said, oh yeah, I'm well aware of that. I says, okay, great. So if you and I both agree it's not a science book, it's not trying to be scientific, it's not trying to use scientific terms to tell to us how, God went about, what mechanisms God necessarily used to create man and woman. Just says dirt, that's it.
You know what I said?
But he was like stretching, it was a major stretch on his part. So
you want to know the best way to actually, that's a pretty good response. But check this out. Have you ever heard the expression, you are what you eat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. There are anywhere between 80 and 82, I think, minerals and trace minerals out there. And then there are vitamins out there. If you go do a test on the human body and you break it down to its most basic elements, everything that you would find in the soil that is filled with minerals would be the same thing that is found in your body. The Bible says that God formed man out of the dust of the earth. Now, I think in the Hebrew, if you look in the Hebrew and look at that word dust, it's supposed to be talking about the soil. And the soil back then would have been red soil. You know what I mean? And that soil back then, before the earth became the way it was, would have been rich in minerals and everything. You know what I mean? Yeah. So he thinks it's literal dust, like, like the kind of dust that you would that you see from on your TV or like on your wall or something like that. Like drag creates straw man just like David Silverman do. But anybody that knows anything about health and fitness or whatever, they know that our bodies are pretty much made up of 82 different trace minerals. And that if you break our bodies down to its original thing, that's what we're going to come down to. That's why a lot of them believe that we came from the ocean. Drag doesn't know what he's talking about.
So Brian Stevens says Veckel is right. If the Bible doesn't make sense, why should we force it to make sense? Yeah, we should force it to make sense. We should not. It makes sense automatically.
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah. And if you don't
Makes sense to
understand,
me.
the Bible makes it very clear that the Holy Spirit can teach us these things, so and also the Holy Spirit divvies out the gifts of the Spirit for people to, for different ministries. There are some who are meant to be evangelists, some meant to be teachers, some meant to be pastors, some meant to be preachers, so on and so forth. So it's not a problem. It's not a problem. I mean,
Exactly.
And as you mentioned already, Deuteronomy 29:29, things that are concealed to us belong unto God, not to us.
Exactly.
Yeah. Amen.
Let's get back to the video.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Intelligent in the design of the universe. Never. And I want to make sure that you understand something here. I have said this before. I am not married to atheism. I'm not. Atheism is a conclusion.
No, he's actually married to a woman who's a practicing Jew. So she couldn't convince him. And he couldn't convince her. But he's supposed to be the one who's in sales, and he's the man, and he's in marketing. He wasn't able to promote his belief in atheism to his own wife.
He looks like a salesman. He looks like one, yeah.
It's the tie, Beckel. It's a tie.
Yeah, that's what it is. He looks like a used car salesman.
Basically, I was about to say that. Yeah.
It's like
Looks like a con artist. That's what he look like.
Based on what your inputs are, based on your data. And if any God ever existed, if any supernatural had ever been proven at all, even once, I wouldn't be an atheist, because I'd be wrong.
That's a lie.
Unfortunately for my opponent, the number of times that the supernatural has been found and documented and figured out and proven is zero. Never.
Pause.
Morality, yes, I've already mentioned there's no.
The reason why he's coming to that conclusion because he's trying to use science to understand the supernatural world. All you got to do is ask David, and this is why the great debate pretty much on YouTube is over, because these guys have gotten stomped on this particular topic. Beckel, you remember this, Beckel? And I think Evangelist Kim was one of the first persons to bring this out, I think, in our community, in our little community, where he said that if science was limited to only be able to deal with the natural world, why would you believe that science can actually test for the supernatural world?
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? There are things that are so small that we need a machine to see it. But we don't know if there's something that's even smaller than that, no matter what kind of equipment we have that will be able to see it. It would be technically invisible or whatever, right? So there has to be another way that we measure whether or not these things exist. And I think the other way is faith. And you'll notice a lot of them will claim to be epistemists and will claim that faith is not a good measuring tool. And when they're not doing that, what are they doing? Romans chapter 1. They are suppressing the truth about God, professing themselves to be wise. These people became fools, started worshiping the creation, what they can see with their eyes, the physical world, and it just became foolish and dark in their hearts or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and through deductive reasoning, and I kind of pose this challenge to some atheists when they use that line of reasoning too. Through deductive reasoning, you can tell whether or not you can determine whether or not or conclude, I should say, whether or not I'm wearing pants. If you only see me in the camera right now, but you don't know if I'm wearing pants. but through deductive reasoning, you can know either I'm wearing pants or I'm not wearing pants, right? Okay, great. That's easy. But what you can't determine is what color my pants are or what design my pants are, or anything of the sort. You know what I mean? So you can't design, you can only, and this is one of the easy things I find trying to tackle somebody's atheist with when they try to tell me that they know no God exists, but yet they don't have omniscient knowledge. They don't know about every nook and cranny of everything in the universe, exactly. What's going on, let alone whether or not I'm wearing pants, so I don't know. This David Silverman guy, I when I first watched him and then saw him a second time in this in the James White debate, I just does people actually take this guy seriously? I mean, I feel like I'm arguing with an atheist on YouTube or something. No disrespect to the atheist, but.
Well, it's to the atheists on YouTube. Actually, what's really funny is later on in this debate, people start clapping for Frank Turek, and he actually gets mad at the audience. He's like, "Why are you clapping?"
I saw that. I saw that.
It's actually really
When I
kinda
said that
funny.
he looks like a used car salesman, I meant that he looks like a used car salesman.
Okay. Fair question. We gotta take a vote. Who do you think did better in their conversation? SJ with Matt Dillahunty or David Silverman with Frank Turek?
Oh, I didn't see that debate with you
Oh,
and Matt Dillahunty.
I didn't do well with it. I called into the Atheist Experience 3 years ago, and
Oh, you talked about that,
he
right?
hung up on me.
You gotta see it, Veckel. He hung up on me too. But Veckel, you
It's
gotta
terrible.
see it.
It's terrible.
He hangs up on everybody. Come on.
Well, hey, I want to mention
He did pretty
something that
good.
these guys can't explain, and I don't know if I've talked about this too much in this audience, but one thing that they can't explain when they talk about us just sort of evolving from primordial soup or evolving from sort of processes in the ocean or whatever the idea that they have is they can't explain how our consciousness came about. And we say this idea of mind before matter. There's something called the double slit experiment, where they look at particles and waves and they notice that they act differently when somebody's in the room observing this little experiment. And so they realize there's an important issue with this consciousness. And you would say that would speak to this idea of a consciousness being present in the universe prior to the time that humans were here for all of the sort of stuff to happen. And so IP was trying to make that argument in one of his debates against Matt Dillahunty. And he went into some better details on that, but you can find information on that by a guy called Robert Lanza. He's got a really good book on biocentrism.
All right.
Okay.
So
All
it's
right,
just,
let's get back to the straw man.
Objective morality, all morality is fluid. Which is why if you look in the Bible, you'll see genocide and slavery and incest portrayed positively.
he can't even argue against that because he, again, is a moral relativist. So he can't make any sort of judgment calls on what happened in the Bible. In fact, like your channel yesterday, when you were going over, you actually took some really tough topics. You guys have to go to Veckel's and G-Man's channels. Make sure you subscribe. It's really important you do that. But on Veckel's channel yesterday, he went into some of the hardest topics in the Bible, and you read this story, this really awful story. And as you said, the Bible in some cases is just descriptive. It's not prescriptive. It's not telling people how they should act when you see these bad actors in the Bible doing the wrong things. It's showing you, here's what happened in the past, and they're just telling us about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay.
But let him get into the more about the slavery and whatnot.
Oh, yeah,
Because he
let's
says
do
a
it.
lot of stupid stuff with this. Let's listen to that.
Okay.
There's no commandment against rape. There's no commandment against slavery. There are 4 commandments about obeying the laws.
See, he's not even clear on that. Here's the commandment against rape. God basically said that if you rape somebody, then you're going to have be subject to death.
He'll be stoned to death according to the Bible. Yo, I want to know who voted for this guy to be the president of the atheists or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, pick up
Well,
the
Matt
book and read
Dillahunty
it.
was on the board.
Do atheists still argue from this? Because this line of argumentation coming from Silverman sounds really old to me. Like I don't really hear atheists arguing this way
They know
much
better.
anymore.
They know better
except
because
for
they get
guys
slapped
like
around and they use this mess today.
Right. And I think I kind of put that, well, not me, I'm sure many others, such as yourselves, have, paved the way for other Christians in the future to come by. But I mean, earlier on in my faith, in my walk with Christ, these were the type of arguments I was familiar with all the time. And I was always worried about, offending people, because I mean, this is what they'll do. They'll bring up these things, slavery, genocide, incest, and all this stuff in the Bible, not making a proper distinction between prescription and description. And this is one of the things that this was one of my weaknesses, because they would use this to try to pluck at the heartstrings of the listeners and stuff like
It's
that.
an appeal to emotion.
But yeah, that's all it is. It took me a long time to get that. But nowadays, I don't see too many atheists going that route now. Now it's just kind of a bunch of futile attempts to bring correction on.
Tyler, fiction.
Yeah. Remember, like I said, he goes from talking about things being objectively moral, but when he can't prove it, now he's just trying to point out contradictions in the Bible regarding God's moral character but he's failed in that area too. So I wonder what's his next motive is going to be.
Yeah, and just like what you're mentioning here, like incest, God basically said, do not sleep with family members. There are examples of people who did that, but that's just descriptive. And the idea with slavery too, the type of slavery in the Bible in a lot of cases was voluntary slavery. And so it more be like indentured servitude. And if they're Hebrews, they're supposed to end the slavery after 7 years. There are all these specific rules. And it was basically these people were provided by their masters, and a lot of them chose to stick around with their masters after the time was up because they realized they're getting their food, their clothing, their shelter, they're working for the person. It wasn't like modern day slavery, which again is completely against what the Bible said. The Bible said specifically, you're not allowed to kidnap. Okay, so in modern day slavery, that's exactly what people did. They kidnapped people and they brought them over here against their will. And so that's going against the Bible. So a lot of times people try to generate emotions by trying to get us to think about modern time slavery and not looking at the type of slavery that was in the Bible.
Quick question. He thinks, obviously he's not a scientist. I don't think he's much of a philosopher. I don't think he thought this one through. It says morality, there is no objective morality. All morality is fluid, which is why there is genocide, slavery, and incest portrayed positively in the Bible. Wait a minute, let's talk about incest here for a moment, because I always talk about slavery. People don't need to hear that no more. You know, as an evolutionist, just out of curiosity, the first man and the first woman, how did they reproduce? Like, did they self-reproduce? Like, how did they go about creating other human beings? I'm pretty sure somebody's brother and sister had to get together in order to, like, you know, start everything off. But I'll take it a step further. Actually, have you read The Origin of Species before?
Yeah, long time ago.
Okay. Did you know that the author of that book actually married, I believe, a couple of his first cousins?
So he married his first cousin and they had 10 kids.
Really?
Yeah, and they all had problems, except maybe one or two of them.
Atheists don't have no problem whatsoever with incest, especially when we're talking about the first man and the first woman. They need to stop that nonsense. That is funny.
Well, what they'll say is that people evolved from the monkey in different locations at around the same time. So it wasn't the first human man had, you know, sex with his brother and sister.
Wait a minute, you're still a monkey. According to them, you're still a monkey. You're still an ape. But it gets even better though, Jack. But check this out. Why is it immoral for a human being to do incest, but it's not immoral for a monkey or a chimpanzee or like an orangutan to do incest?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But you understand what I'm saying? We're all animals anyway, right? Like when you start really questioning this stuff, you begin to understand this how foolish these people are. Some of the things that they believe. It's ridiculous.
You know, I think it's one of the things about the Bible that we can tell from the genealogy that was laid out by Matthew and Luke is a lot of times they'll talk about the really important people. They'll talk about certain people, but they won't make mention of every single person that lived during those times. They'll make mention of the ones they felt were important. So sometimes in the genealogies, they might mention a grandfather, then they skip a few generations, then they might mention somebody else. And so the reason I'm pointing this out is because it's not, it wouldn't be inconceivable to think that God could have invented, first he had Adam and Eve and they had some kids, and then maybe around the same time God populated the planet with some more people, just didn't mention them in the Bible, but just talking about Adam's line, and maybe they were intermarrying with each other. And so there's no, it's completely conceivable, I should say.
That had to be true.
It could be the case, yeah.
It had to be true, because if you look at the genealogies, it's primarily dealing with men. You know what I mean? Men's got to marry somebody. You know what I mean? Have offspring with somebody. So. Well,
you're talking about how the earth was populated, though. You know, before Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, because that's when God put out the mandate that incest is done. You know.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a. But before that, we don't see. Yeah. But before that, we don't see God really speaking too much against the idea that Abraham married his half sister or Isaac married his half cousin.
Right.
You know, something like that. So God's kind of silent on that, but he does speak up in Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20. Hey, no more of this. No more marrying your cousin. No more your son, daughter, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, good. And I want to say somebody in the chat brought up Job, and I want to talk about Job for just a second because this person brought up Job. He's saying basically that Satan and God sort of gotten into a bet and that sort of thing. A lot of people look at Job as being an example of a person who was completely righteous, and Job was righteous, but God knew that sometimes even righteous people have to be tested, and so God tested him, and Job became very self-righteous. And there were 4 of his friends who talked to him about him being self-righteous. 3 of them, God didn't like their approach, but one of them, God basically backed this guy's approach. So Elihu, when he called Job out for being a little bit self-righteous, thinking that, and God listened to that, and God also said, where were you when I created the oceans? Where were you when I created the earth? Where were you? You know, and basically saying, I'm sovereign, I'm the creator, you're the created, and that's the deal. So
Exactly.
that's a tough one. People don't like the story of Job, but you have to actually look and see how Job was acting too through that book. So
Well, actually, if you think about it, Job happens every day, you know, because Satan can't do anything without God giving him the okay. Good, because Satan's going to be Satan anyway. You know what I mean? And it's our job to resist him when he does come and tries to like influence our lives.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and if Job was sinless, you know, which is what I think most people are referring to when they see the word perfect in that passage, then we wouldn't see passages like what we see in Job 9 and Job 13, where Job himself is actually talking about, you know, he's admitting that he's imperfect, you know.
Right.
Yeah, and Romans 3:23 says everyone falls short.
Exactly.
That's right. That's right.
That's right. Only person that was perfect that walked this earth, his name was Jesus the Christ. And it's time to get back to Mr. Strawman.
Okay, here we go.
Why? If that's objectively moral, do you think that it's objectively moral or objectively immoral to rape? Well, I think it's pretty immoral to rape.
But that's just his opinion.
Why?
There's no commandment against rape. So where are you getting that morality? You're getting it from us. We picked it.
Mute.
No commandment against rape.
That has nothing to. Okay, first of all, I'm trying to understand his structuring of his argument. All right, what does that got to do with objective and subjective morality? Okay, number one, there is a command. We just corrected him about that. I think SJ gave the scripture for that. Me and Beckel have done this God knows how many different times here on YouTube. They don't listen and they don't want to listen. That there are commands against it. You would get stoned to death, or number 2, you would have to take care of that woman for the rest of your life. Okay, so stop pretending. For those of you atheists, stop make believing and playing like fairy tales or whatever, believing that no one's ever said this to you. All right, but the structure of his argument don't make no sense to me. What does rape existing in the Bible or in biblical times got to do with objective and subjective morality? You know what I mean? If subjective morality exists, and SJ says this over and over, and then nothing right. There's nothing right or wrong. You can't say nothing. The rape is good and it's bad at the same time.
You're right. It's just his opinion.
Yeah.
In his opinion, rape is wrong. In his opinion, in his opinion, murder's wrong. I'm sure it's the same thing.
I couldn't be no atheist. These people crazy, man. I know.
But I think after my little study I did last night, I think from now on, whenever I confront or whenever I'm confronted by an atheist about the rape issue, about why the rapist was under the Hebrew law forced to marry his victim, I'm going to continue to bring up Judges 19, the passage that I talked about last night about Judges 19. What would happen to a woman in that society if she was not under the federal headship of a man, under the protection of a man? She was subject to exactly what happened to the concubine, to possible, not all the time, because obviously, there are some righteous men out there at the time, of course, but she was, if she did not have the federal headship of a man or protection of a man in that society, there was a possibility of something like what we see in Judges 19 happening to her, where she was ravaged and raped by the sons of Belial.
Yeah.
To the point where she actually died. Why?
Let me ask you a question. I'm sorry.
I get a little emotional, when I read that passage, man. I really want to punch that dude in his face, man.
I do too.
I've never been emotionally disturbed by a character in the Bible, a person in the Bible, except that one, man.
Beckel, let me ask you a question, Beckel.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, in the Bible, there were 2 penalties for doing that. One of them was a death penalty, and the other one was the man the man would be punished, and then he would, if the father gave permission, obviously, then he would be able to marry the woman he had to take care of for the rest of her life. A lot of people think that's not a punishment, but it is, especially if you're wealthy and you don't want to share your money with her. I'm speaking from a man's perspective, you know what I mean? But let me ask you something. What if that woman was raped in our society today? I want you to think about something here in a minute, okay? So what was raped in our weak, what do they call it? Cookie cutter society today. What happens? What's the punishment for him?
Yeah, he'll be in jail for several.
Oh, he'll be in jail, and when he goes to jail, he'll be getting 3 square meals. Some of them can play Nintendo in jail, right? Some of them will only be in there for a few years. Good behavior to be able to come out. Yeah, you get put through a database, but really the penalty, in my opinion, isn't as severe as it should be if a man did that to another woman, right? Think about all the psychological impact that's going to happen to the woman. I'll make an individual video about this, but where I'm going with this is that if she has that baby, who's going to help her? How is she going to support that baby?
Only a righteous man who, because again, in
No,
that.
Beckel, you're missing it, Beckel, because I agree with you with that.
Yeah.
Who is the one that's going to support it? God said that the man was either killed or the man had to marry her and care for her. In our society today, who's going to care for that woman if she can't find a job and she's got that baby because she was violated?
Only a good person.
Even if the government was going to do it, it's very similar to what the Bible says. The man would have to care for her. In our society, I'm willing to bet somebody's watching this mentioning, you can apply for welfare or food stamps or whatever, and you probably get WIC and you can take care of the child that way. The point of the matter is the government's going to make sure she's cared for. So if the government can do it and that seems to be okay, then why can't God be okay for saying, look, you committed this crime against her. You thought she was good enough to force yourself on her sexually. Now you're going to have to be with her for the rest of your life. According to the Mosaic law, you're going to have to care for her. And if you don't, you know what I mean? All your possessions are going to belong to her. Because that's ultimately what's going to happen if he dies. She gets everything.
It is a tough subject to think about because, a woman who's been violently used like that, just to have to face this individual on a regular basis, every day, every morning, you got to think about how mentally disturbing that's got to be for her. So in that society,
it happens in marriages all the time where men.
Well, it's the idea too. Her father had to give permission. So if she didn't, if she didn't want to do that, then she could remain with the father and under his protection.
And women were viewed very differently back then too. One of the things we got to remember is women didn't have the rights and women were not treated the way women are treated today. And that has to be remembered. That's why it's always important to look at their society and how things was done in their society before we start making sweeping judgments about what's right and what's wrong, because they don't live in 2020. We would handle things a little bit differently, but it doesn't mean the way things were handled back then was bad. The reason why I come across as a little stronger with this, Beckel, I think than you sometimes is because I heard this lame argument over and over and over again, and it is a bad one, and it's horrible. And I know later on they're gonna be calling me a horrible person. G-Man believes that somebody should care for a woman if something happened to her. I'm pretty sure they'll come up with all kinds of goofy stuff, but I don't care. My thing is that God is just and he is righteous, and he, unlike us today, would actually pull money, actually will make sure she's provided for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Y'all can rebuke me later, but
No, that's good. All right, let's go. Let's go. Here we go.
And we're choosing morality on a real-time basis on an ever-evolving curve. We are making the choice. We are a social animal. Now, theism is wrong. And Chuck was up here before. You said that the Bible was written by God. Well, God made man in his own image. That's what the Bible says.
True.
But evolution proves that wrong, doesn't it?
False.
Now, I want to make sure that you all understand that evolution is proven scientific fact. It's not dogma. It's repeatable. It's testable. It's proven in every way possible. We know more about evolution than we know about
what he's saying here is he's ignoring the science right now. Like Royal Society, as I mentioned before, has gotten together and realized that there are some deficiencies in evolution that evolution, as they've posited, has not been able to explain. And so I'm going to give a mention of what these deficiencies are real quickly.
Oh, man. This is Aaron Ross' little brother, ain't it? Is this Aaron Ross' older brother or his little brother? I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, here's what the Royal Society questions about evolution. So they said, hold on, I'm just getting to it. So it's called the Royal Society. It's in evolutionnews.org. There's this article here, and it basically says, hold on one second. Where are the flaws?
Mutations.
Here we go. Phenotype complexity. So what they don't know, this is what they don't know evolution cannot explain. The origin of eyes, ears, body plans, the anatomical and structural features of living creatures. It also cannot explain phenotypic novelty, which is the origin of new forms throughout the history of life. For example, the mammalian radiation some 66 million years ago, in which the major orders of mammals, such as crustaceans, bats, carnivores, enter the fossil record, or even more dramatically, the Cambrian explosion, with most animal body parts appearing more or less without antecedents. What is that saying? That's saying that all of these animals just sort of popped into existence. They don't have a line of other animals coming before them. And so there's that problem. And then they say the non-gradual forms or modes of transition, where you see abrupt discontinuities in the fossil record between different types. So what we're saying is that's evidence against evolution as posited by Darwin. So there's a lot of questions with evolution. It's not just this big fact, like David Silverman saying. They themselves, the scientists, have been trying to study this stuff. They can't figure it out.
And also, they need to explain how mutations create new anatomical features in these animals. All mutations do is give you the same information. Like for example, if you have two hands, they give you a third hand. If you have an eye, if you have two eyeballs, they give you a third eyeball or whatever. You know what I mean? That information is already there. They cannot show you how a mutation happens where an arm becomes a wing or a wing becomes an arm or anything like that. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of problems with that theory.
There's a lot of problems. So he's about to go to the Bible, I think. So I've also got something to refute what he's saying about the Bible. So hold on one sec.
Gravity, we know more about evolution than we know about electricity. It's a proven fact. The bad news for you is that it completely disproves the Garden of Eden, which disproves original sin and disproves the need for a savior, which is.
And one of the other things to point out in the Bible is if God did use evolution as a means to bring us here, people, they'll say, well, it happened over billions and billions of years and all this kind of stuff is what the big argument is. But if God decided, you notice in the Bible that first we had plants, then we had animals, then we had humans. So actually that could go right in line with what evolution is saying in a way. So if God did use that means and he inspired and divinely moved people into different forms, that's even more power to him, more glory to God.
SJ, how old is this video? Is this recent?
I think it's a few years old. I'm not sure.
Okay, because most atheists that I talk to will actually say to me that evolution doesn't disprove the Bible. As a Christian, do you realize that I had to make several videos on YouTube and say that if evolution is true, that it would disprove the Bible? Most atheists believe that, well, this is what they said out of their own mouth. A lot of them, I'm not gonna say most of them, but a lot of them believe that that you could still be a Christian and believe in evolution at the same time. And I think it's because of the theistic evolutionists and the argument that you just made. So again, where is he getting his information? Why is he so respected?
Yeah, there's another verse in the Bible. It's basically Genesis 1:20. And in Genesis 1:20, God said, and it's in different versions, it's like in King James Version, it's a little different than this, but let the water teem with living creatures and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. One of the things that you point out in that one, if you look at the King James Version, is it talks about basically fish sort of evolving maybe into birds. And so there is some evidence that something like that could have happened. There is some evidence that between certain species that there could be some evidence of evolution. I'm just saying between certain species, and they think that possibly some of the birds might have evolved out of fish, and that's evidenced here in Romans 1:20.
Well, we could talk about that some other day. All right.
But I'm just saying I'm saying if God used evolution, William Lane Craig has had some really good statistics on this, but he said, if God did use evolution, it even gives us, and they looked at the odds of all of the stuff occurring right now in the time that we've been on this planet. And the odds are extraordinarily against us being, us not having some sort of divine intervention.
Hey guys, I do apologize. I got to step away for a little bit. So I got to answer this phone call.
Oh, no worries.
But yeah, I'll still be tuning in from the outside and hopefully I can come back in if you guys are around.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Is why Christianity will not admit that it's wrong. It has a very strong effect not to. Another one, God made earth before light, less than 10,000 years ago.
Okay,
In the
that's
beginning,
one.
God created heaven and earth. Listen closely. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And the earth was waste and lifeless, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." Clearly, God made earth before God made light.
So he's not getting something that's really important here is, and Hugh Ross has pointed this out, and you can read a lot of Hugh Ross's books. He does detailed books on Genesis, but as an astronomer and somebody who studied the way that the Earth's atmosphere would have been in its inceptions, he realized that when the Earth was formed, there were clouds covering the entire Earth for a very long period of time before people from the Earth, or not people, but before anyone was able to see the sun. And so when you think about the Bible as written in the perspective of a person on the earth and not being able to see, you see that the light, when the clouds finally moved, the light shone in later. And so people were able to visibly see the sun later. And so he does a lot of really good explanations on that. That makes a lot of sense. So it actually gives us more support for the gospel being true, because how would the authors have possibly known that clouds were covering the world at that time? But clouds were covering the world completely at that time.
And something else I want to recommend some people to do, if you want to know about the Hebrew word light, go to gotquestions.org. It does a really good job of explaining what is actually being said there when it says, "Let there be light." Eshe, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Eshe, that Jesus himself calls himself the light of the world. And there are 2 occasions where God himself is the light in the Bible, believe it or not. And number one is in Genesis. And by the way, this is in gotquestions.org if you guys go look at this. But it's in Genesis chapter 1 where it says, God said, "Let there be light," and it was light. And I believe that God was the actual light that sustained the earth, right? Because I think what was it? In the 4th day, I think he created the sun and the stars and all of that. The light that was going to rule the day, and the light was going to rule the night, right? And in the book of Revelation, the Bible says, and this is a scripture, by the way, okay, since David Silverman wants to go there, all right? If you actually go to the book of Revelation, toward the end of the book, I'm sorry, not toward the end of the book, I think, what is it? Is it 21 or 22, where it talks about how there's going to be no more sky, and that God himself is actually the light.
Yeah. No, that's right. That absolutely is what it says. Hey, I'm seeing Shakira Sanders. I don't know how to, Gavin, I don't think that the tweet, or that, I'm sorry, the message that he put in the comments was offensive when he just said hi to Ronan. So I think it'd probably be fair not to hide him from the channel. I just want to mention that
Okay. But that's a very important distinction to make, because now he's trying to say that he understands, as a matter of fact, I want to give a warning to the atheists. Anytime you guys read our Bibles and you start coming out and you start teaching and telling people what it is that we're saying, please understand that you're making a positive claim and you're making a knowledge claim. Right? This is something that we used to say a lot in the great debate community, actually. The moment they make a knowledge claim, we can hold them to it, because now they're saying they understand what they're reading. When they say they understand what they're reading, now we can say, okay, so what's the Hebrew word mean? What's actually being said there? Who was the author? How did the Jews understand and interpret what they were reading there? Okay, let's go to the book of Revelation, where it says that there's going to be no more sky, and God and Christ and Jesus was going to be the light. What does that mean? He isn't going to do all of that. You know what I mean? Because he's only interested in looking for errors in the Bible and not actually trying to understand it. Yeah.
And that's another thing that it's strange to me when people who are atheists fancy themselves as being Bible experts, but they for some reason miss the passage in Romans 1:28 that basically says that they're not going to understand. They're not going to have an understanding of the Bible, so they won't have any discernment. And so they'll ignore that passage and pretend like they have superior knowledge of the Bible than people who believe in God. So I think that's kind of unusual.
See, a platform like that, SJ, would be perfect for me. I can't wait and for God to deem me worthy to be in this platform, because I don't know. I just think I would be able to handle myself so much better. I think some of the people that be on there, Okay, so let's go. All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are made mostly of carbon atoms. We have proven beyond doubt that we are made up of carbon atoms, and we have proven beyond doubt that these carbon atoms are formed only in the belly of stars. We had to go through an entire generation of stars in this universe before the first planet formed. That's proven. That's done. So if God wrote the Bible, God was wrong many times. But interesting fact, of course, theism never admits it. Theism never admits it's wrong, even when its arguments are proven wrong beyond doubt. I have a question. How can something that never admits its errors be trusted as an explanation for reality?
Theism isn't a person. You know what I'm saying? Theism is not a person. So trying to say that theism never admits it's wrong, it doesn't even make sense. If he wants to say if he wants to make a claim that some theists will never admit that they are wrong, that's a different argument. But to say that theism, it doesn't, are you seeing that, what I'm saying? I mean,
I'm gonna wait until he makes his ultimate statement, because he's gonna get face palmed hard when he does it.
Okay, so we should keep going.
Say that ultimate statement first.
Okay,
keep talking.
There are some children in this audience. Would you trust somebody that would never admit they were wrong, even if you proved it? And they said, no, I'm right. You wouldn't. Another fact, in world history, the number of times an atheistic argument has been proven wrong with a theistic argument is 0. I'll say that again. The number of times an atheistic argument has been proven wrong with a theistic argument is 0.
Okay, mute this. Face palm. That's it. You go first, SJ, and I'm gonna destroy. And only use one, SJ, because I know you throw every ball.
Well, I mean, even the arguments that he's mentioned. So he's ignoring the fact that the cosmological argument, the moral argument, the teleological argument, the argument about Jesus. So we've got this idea, if somebody wants to say that God doesn't exist, you've got Jesus resurrecting from the dead. That gives us really good evidence that God divinely powered that. And so we've got all kinds of examples.
Okay. So one of the atheist arguments that he's using in this one is because, as far as I'm concerned, his whole opening statement has been debunked by theism, and the other guy hasn't even spoken yet, and that's the God of the gaps. Listen to me very carefully here for all of you watching this. I'm putting my mouth close to this microphone here. Okay, the God of the gaps is not for Christianity. Okay, since no atheistic argument can be beaten by theism or beaten by a person who has a belief in God that has an argument that happens to be theistic. Okay. Go look up what a deist is, okay? A deist is someone, and I mentioned this earlier in the show, a deist is someone who believes that God set everything into motion and then left everything alone. That argument, the God of the gaps, was originally made for a deist. Go look it up, okay? Go look it up. It was not made for Christians. It was made by a Christian. So that's no, I'm sorry, SJ, if I blew your ears out. Okay, so number two.
Yeah.
One of their favorite arguments that atheists will make, actually, how many times have you heard this? The burden of proof is on the one making the claim, right? And they try to use this argument to try to they use this argument to try to put all of the burden on us, keep us on the defensive all the time, right? Well, the burden is on you. The burden, I'm the one who's who you have to prove or whatever, right? All you got to do is say this: do you believe that God exists? Yes or no? No, I don't believe that your God exists, and I don't believe no evidence has ever been presented. Okay, I'm going to meet my burden and give you the Kalam cosmological argument. I'm going to meet my burden and talk about intelligent design. Now you have a burden to prove that no one's ever presented any evidence to you, and you can begin to see how foolish these people are. And if you really want to see how dumb of an argument this guy just made was, go watch Side 10 Brunique. Actually, I don't know if you've ever seen it, SJ.
He's been on my channel.
Side 10 Brunique has had the fastest debate in YouTube history. He debated a guy by the name of the Realistic Nihilist. And Realistic Nihilist was using an atheistic argument. I lie to you not. The argument was over in less than 3 minutes. Side 10 asked him 3 questions. The debate was over. That was it. There was no back and forth. There was none of that. He literally had to okay, let's debate this topic. Let's debate this topic. Like, the debate was over. It is on the Bible Thumping We Nuts YouTube channel. The debate's over in less than 3 minutes. All right.
Wow.
Put that out there. So David Silverman's on crack. That's what he's on.
Interesting. Yeah, no, and actually, if you just joined us, you want to make sure the link to this particular video, the full video, the 2 hour and 20-minute video, is in the description. And so you can watch that. And Dr. Frank Turek does a wonderful job responding to a lot of these things that Silverman
One more thing, SJ. Another argument that's made on the atheist experience all the time is that the atheists know the Bible better than us. I'm surprised you're not laughing and giggling by hearing that one, okay? They always say that they know the Bible better than us and that we should learn our faith from them. I don't know if they're being serious or being goofy or whatever when they say it, but they like to say these kind of things, right? Well,
Yeah.
if that's true, then why is it that Matt Dillahunty, when he went on and this is something else that you should go check out as you haven't seen it yet. Matt Dillahunty came on the Bible Thumping Wingnuts YouTube channel and talked to Matt Slick. Matt Slick specifically asked Matt Dillahunty, did he understand why we had so many different denominations? Matt Dillahunty said no. Okay. He asked Matt Dillahunty about the gospel and salvation. Matt Dillahunty didn't know. He asked him 3 basic questions about the faith. And this man supposedly went to seminary, SJ, for 5 years and didn't know the answers to none of those things.
Yeah. I don't know if he actually went to seminary. I think he said that, because I saw him saying something about that. I think he just said that he studied it. But I don't know if he actually went to seminary, but I don't think a lot of them do say that they went to seminary. I've encountered a lot of atheists who say they've been to seminary, or they were studying to be a pastor when suddenly they had this revelation that it was all untruths. And here's what, like you mentioned, here's what it says right here. And I was reading the wrong Romans chapter. So it's, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. So this whole idea, although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. So the bottom line is that people can say that there's no God. It's this idea of, is there an atheist? All atheists know that there's a God. Okay, the Bible makes that clear, but it's also just, it's written on our hearts. It's also written in nature and a general revelation. So to say you're an atheist is to just really be in denial. So it's kind of just to say you're a denier. But then this idea is, once you've suppressed God so much, God sends a powerful delusion to let you live under that, this suppression, so that you can live out your lives as you choose without him basically there. So when people say, well, why is God going to send me to hell? That's really immoral of God. This idea of God doesn't send anybody to hell. People choose to be away from God. God doesn't force you to be with him in heaven. Heaven wouldn't be heaven if God forced its inhabitants to be there.
Amen. Amen and amen. And let's get back to the straw man,
That's a 100% track record. Science is commonly referred to as atheistic. It is only atheistic because in world history, there's been no evidence ever for the existence of a God. Never once at all, anywhere.
You realize, of course, he's representing the 3% of the world who have rejected God. So it's
3%. I thought it was 0.0%.
It might even be less. Yeah, it could even be less. So he's representing a teeny portion of the world, trying to say that the world has said there's no God. You know, one of the evidences in support of God that people might not know too is the population. A lot of people say, well, why is it, if the earth is however many, you know, if it's 4.5 billion years, some people say it's 6,000 years, but whatever it is, whatever the age of the earth is, people make this argument that why did Jesus come when he did? Why didn't he come at the very beginning, like with Adam and Eve and that sort of thing? And one of the reasons is, if you look at the size of our population, the vast majority, 57% have lived since the year 1 AD, 57% so far. So a lot of people don't realize that just in the last 2,000 years, of the 108 billion people who've walked the planet, 57% of them came afterwards. So, and those who came before, a lot of times people don't realize this, but in the Gospels, in the Old Testament, there's a lot of evidence that Jesus was making himself manifest as the angel of the Lord in many cases.
Yes. There's a lot of things that point to Christ back then, like the angels that visited Abraham, one of them, because Abraham actually prayed to this angel. You know, Melchizedek, he didn't have any, Melchizedek, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Melchizedek, he didn't have no beginning or no end. You know what I mean?
On the order of Melchizedek.
And then Jesus was that rock, that the rock that provided the water for the Israelites in the desert. You're right. Yeah.
I agree that too. Those are all good. So, okay, so here we go.
If I was wrong on that point even once, I would drop my job and become a believer. But it has never happened because it's a myth. It's a lie. And theism lies a lot. There's a lot of lying going on in theism. Double meanings with words with double meanings. Evolution is just a theory. How many people have heard evolution is just a theory? Just like, oh, I don't know, creationism or any theory that I think up. They don't talk about the double meanings of the word theory, the difference between a philosophical theory and a scientific theory. They equate them in a deliberate attempt to mislead you. No requires absolute knowledge. You can't know anything, they say.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Earlier, he said evolution was a fact. We have more evidence for evolution than we do for electricity. You know, right now, for me to be on this show right now, I have to plug in my computer to the wall. I have to use electricity to use my laptops. I have to use a form of energy or electricity to use a lot of my electronic equipment. And I don't even know that much about these electronic things. And I seem to know a lot more about that than I do about evolution. You want to know why? Because depending on the evolutionists that you're talking to on that particular day, depending on what school they went to, depending on what state they live in, they all got different stories about what evolution actually is. You understand what I'm saying? So, oh, Lord, Father God, evolution is a theory because when you say it's a fact, then they got to prove it. And what they got to prove is that with facts, no faith whatsoever, none of that, you got to prove that I'm related to a gator, and they can't do it. They understand that there has to be a certain amount of faith involved in order for them to make a claim like that.
Yeah, and there's a really big question that we have to go back, even if we think about that. Evolution, even though Darwin's book's called On the Origin of the Species, evolution doesn't explain our origins. It doesn't explain how the very first, what are they called? RNA molecules, how the very first RNA molecules appeared here. And so
Right.
Dawkins has actually proposed that maybe they came over from what is he called? Panspermia, which basically is saying that they came from another planet. So in other words, he's pushing the buck back to a different planet just to try to get away from the origins problem because they can't figure out the origins. In panspermia, that the idea is maybe we were hit by a meteor and it had some sort of life form from another planet, some sort of RNA and all that kind of stuff. So that's again a faith position with zero support.
Right, and they have to imagine it. I actually talked about that on GTV. It's funny that you brought that up. As far as I'm bringing up aliens, that at that particular point, you're arguing for theism at that particular point, because now we can argue that superhuman beings put human beings here. You know what I mean? I wouldn't argue that way, but there are a lot of people out there that are pagans that will argue that way, and they will have a harder time arguing with them.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, somebody on Twitter did that yesterday to me. She wrote me and she said, we don't have any evidence of God, but I think there's probably some super aliens out there with higher power. And I thought, oh my gosh, like Chesterton said, if you don't believe in atheism, you might just start believing in everything. And so, so we have no evidence of any aliens. We have nothing. So that's the thing. And actually going back to Hugh Ross, he's got some pretty interesting insights as far as aliens. I had somebody in the chat who's no longer in there, but who is a pagan. I think he's a pagan, or he said he's a witch or something like that. But Hugh Ross says these kind of interesting things with the RUFO, the residual UFOs, and he posits that might actually be some demonic activity, which is pretty interesting.
But you'll notice that is anything and everything but God. That is denialism at its best.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's anything but God. And I think people do that for a number of different reasons. I think sometimes they do it in an emotional way because maybe they had some bad experiences with maybe their parents or the church or something like that, and they're lashing out. And sometimes they do it because they want to live a certain lifestyle and it's not in alignment with the lifestyle that God wants us to live. Or some of it's, what's another reason why people might say that they're atheists?
Oh, I know exactly why they're atheists, because they identify as that. There's no this is what I say on my YouTube channel, and they don't like me on my channel because I say that atheists that people identify as atheists, but that doesn't make you one. What you are is a misotheist, that's a person that hates God, or an anti-theist, that's a person that hates religion. I don't even give it to them that they're atheists. Like when I debate them, I say, okay, first prove you're an atheist before I even get to God or anything. You know?
I think that a lot of them, I mean, there's these different reasons why they might do it. I think some people might think it's the trendy thing to do or the edgy thing. Like I think there's a guy on Twitter I've encountered and I've had him on my channel before called Renevelation. Renee is his name. And I think he thinks it's the intellectual thing to do. But the interesting thing is when you're people like C.S. Lewis really look deeply into atheism, he realized it's a really simplistic and flawed sort of arrangement. It doesn't explain our origins, our meaning, our destiny, our morality, our purpose. It doesn't explain anything. And so it's very weak as far as offering us a full explanation of our life.
And that's why there's 3% and we're the rest of the planet.
Yeah. And you guys, if you're in here and you want to know, why did we choose Christianity? Why did we choose out of all the different, some people say, well, there's 3,000 different kind of religions and you just chose one of them. And I've rejected 3,000, you've rejected 2,999. So you're almost an atheist to all of these other religions. I'm like, that is the silliest thing. That, and I think there are some people who are apathetic, but those aren't the ones we're encountering on Twitter and on YouTube, the apathetic atheists. I think that those are people who honestly just don't care, and they're not even looking. They're just not interested. So there's that group of people too. But the thing is as far as Christianity, if you guys start looking and digging deeply and asking sincerely of God to give you some message or some truth, I can promise you that he will respond when you're ready. So he will do that. It took me 20 years to get that out of him, 20 years, but he did respond, what was it, 2012 or so. I started getting all sorts of evidence. I started having dreams, vision. I had a couple of visions. I had a vision where I saw, like a window in the sky, and I saw figures of light in the window. I've heard him audibly correct me when I was thinking something bad. So there is evidence if you ask for it, but you also have to give God time to clean you up a little bit, to get you to the right position before he announces, he starts working pretty heavily in your life and showing you the evidence that you might be asking for.
You got to take that first step out on faith. You got to do it.
Yeah, you definitely want to do it. And if you're really looking and you want to know the truth, read the Gospels. Which Gospel would you recommend, G-Man?
Out of all of the Gospels,
if you had to pick one, like someone said, John. Okay.
Yep.
So what do you like about John?
Well, the Gospel of John shows the heart of God in the sense that his love and the fact that he cares for us, and it doesn't focus on his entire life. It just focuses on, I think, what is it, the last. I think doesn't John just focus on the last year or so of his life primarily?
Well, no, he does include John the Baptist. He does include he does that, but he focuses mainly on the miracles.
Right.
So he's really focused on the miracles. And in the beginning, the Word was a Word, and the Word was made flesh, and the Word was flesh. So, but you know what I like about the book of John? There's a lot of internal evidence that the author is the Apostle John. So he refers to himself as the beloved one of Jesus. He makes it clear in there that the beloved one was the one who was sitting next to Jesus during the Last Supper. And at the very end of it, we also are given some evidence that we're not given in the other Gospels. For example, John and Peter, in the other Gospels, we're told Peter ran to the empty tomb. In John's Gospel, it says John outran Peter on their way to the empty tomb. John, at Jesus's trial, John, for some reason, had some sort of clearance with the Pharisees to be able to get in there and witness the trial. And Peter was there as well, but we're not given that evidence in other Gospel accounts. And so those are just a couple I'm thinking of right off the top of my head, but we're given evidence that the apostle is the one who wrote it. And it's written absolutely beautifully. So should we go to the next one?
Yes, go to Mr. Strawman. Yep.
Okay. Oh, and this is my favorite. The Bible is true because the Bible says it's true. The Bible is good because the Bible says it's good.
Now, who even makes that argument? Have you ever heard anyone make that argument?
I hear atheists saying that. I don't hear us saying that.
I don't hear. When have I ever said the Bible's good because the Bible says the Bible's good? I mean, it's just the silliest thing.
I can tell you the truth. I've never heard a false teacher say that before. Like, where are they getting that?
Yeah, so when you're saying straw man, you're exactly right. He's completely straw manning our position by saying that we say that. We don't. We definitely don't say that.
We sure don't. Moving on.
Okay, yeah, here we go.
This circular reasoning is a deliberate attempt to mislead you. It is a lie, and you should be looking for it. Christianity is a philosophy, according to my friend Bill O'Reilly. He made that up. He wanted to keep Christian privilege. Oh, and that great little cross right there? That's a cross, right? Well, guess what? According to the state of Utah, That's a secular symbol, not a Christian symbol. It's a lie.
Oh, brother.
That's what the Bible means, is another thing. They smoosh.
Pause.
So because in Utah, where it's like 60% Mormon, because they say it's a secular symbol, we're supposed to go with that? Like, you hear his argument? That's kind of...
That argument doesn't even make no... I don't know if he's rushing because his time's almost up or whatever, but that's just ridiculous. Okay, first of all, okay, a better argument would have been, Mr. Silverman, if I was an atheist, I would say that before Jesus died on the cross, that there are pagan religions out there that use that symbol to mean something completely different. Especially if you look at the Egyptian version of their cross, which means eternal life or whatever, or returning from the dead or whatever. You know what I mean? That's what the Kemet's use. You know what I mean? So if you wanted to make an argument to discredit the cross and its meaning and whatnot, you should probably do that. But sitting there saying, well, that cross means that it's secular. Honestly, Ashay, tell me if you think this is true. At this point, it sounds like he's crying. It's like he's not even talking about reality no more. Now he's just talking about, like, atheism is just superior. You know what I mean? That's what it sounds like he's doing.
Yeah. Well, even let's go back to the cross and even think about the significance of the cross. So one of the things that's really interesting that some people don't know is what happened with Constantine. And Constantine's the one who gave Christians legal protections for the very first time in the year 313. Amen. And one of the reasons Constantine became a Christian himself is because he was going to go to war with another person. They were both basically going in battle over which one was going to be the Roman emperor. And Constantine had a vision of a Christian symbol. Now, I don't know exactly which Christian symbol it was. It could have been the cross, but he had a vision of a Christian symbol that basically said to use that Christian symbol. And so he outfitted all of his soldiers with the Christian symbol.
So this time you will conquer.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So just look into that kind of story, because then what happened was he won, and then he ended up giving Christians legal rights and legal protection. So we'd spent the first 280 years without those rights, and we were sporadically persecuted in very heavily, terrible ways. People were crucified, beheaded, all this kind of stuff, and they refused to give it up because they knew the truth. And so when he's saying he's got the truth, he doesn't have the truth. He's got a lie, and that's just a simple fact. So as far as Silverman. So all right, so let's see.
The Bible's incorrect information in today's knowledge, but always in the past tense. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day becomes 2 billion years. Only after we prove the universe is more than 10,000 years old.
Now, he's not mentioning, a lot of the even early church fathers did not make claims on the age of the earth. It's a lot of them want to strawman our position on this kind of thing. But one of the things I just wanted to point out with respect to that is he's ignoring the word yom. So Y-O-M is the way that they use the word day. And just like day can have multiple meanings. You say in his day or in this day and age or something like that. The word yom can have multiple meanings, and it could refer to a bigger period of time than just a 24-hour day.
Right. And I have the same issue with the word light too. If you look at the Hebrew word for light, I forget what the actual word is, but there's two meanings for it. One of them had to do with, God being the light, and then another one had to do with righteousness. So. Yeah,
good. That's interesting too. Yeah. All right. So let's see.
Beyond the shadow of a doubt. The Big Bang is in the Bible after we discovered it, not before. That's metaphorical.
The nice thing about the Gospels is, and this is what Hugh Ross said, is he says it's completely consistent. Genesis is completely consistent with what we know from cosmology. But also, if we go back to the Bible, it says in the beginning. That's not what the Hindu Vedas say. They don't say, they say that the universe is basically recycled. It's eternal and recycled. And so that's going against the Big Bang. The Big Bang actually lines up. And that's one of the reasons why a Catholic priest actually was the one who first proposed the Big Bang. And one of the reasons why people like Einstein were very uncomfortable with it, because they realized it had theological implications. If there's a beginning, there has to be something that started that. And that's what they were worried about if you're a deist.
Right.
Which is what I believe he was. Okay, here we go.
I love that one. That's when you also smush the Bible's backwards morality into today's morality by simply calling the bad stuff allegorical or making some other excuse. Leviticus 20:13.
Oh my God.
He has committed an abomination.
That's why people out there, and I'm not going to call them Catholics. I'll be nice today. There are people out there that believe, what is it, the first 7 chapters, I think, in the book of Genesis, SJ, where they say that it's all allegorical because it can't be backed up scientifically or whatever. You know, that is what I would call a compromise. Okay, just because you got some people out there compromising the scriptures doesn't mean that what those compromisers are saying is actually true. Like, for example, I've had experience on YouTube, SJ, with some people on here saying that, okay, there was no flood, it was an allegory. Okay, that there was no Adam and Eve, that was an allegory. There were no Sodom and Gomorrah was never destroyed, that was an allegory. You know what I mean? Because we can't prove it scientifically. God didn't create the heavens and the earth; they happened to do evolution, so that was an allegory. You know what I mean? The atheist community, the evolutionists out there, they absolutely hate the book of Genesis for that reason, because the book of Genesis tells us that God created the heavens and the earth, that we have a purpose. You know what I mean? And a reason for being here. You know what I mean? And the book of Genesis basically answers all these questions, like, you know, who we are, why we're here, yada, yada, yada. You know what I mean? Whereas the evolutionist wants to, you know, make stuff up. And it's very interesting. You said that the Big Bang was first introduced by a Roman Catholic?
Yeah, Catholic priest, Lemaitre. And
then you said that that the secularists didn't like that, or the deists didn't like that because they understood the theological implications with that. Because if the universe had a beginning, then it had to have a cause, right?
Exactly. Yeah, because before that, we didn't have a lot of the atheists and people say in the 1800s in Germany and places like that were proposing everything was eternal. And they were saying that was why the gospel, I mean, they were saying that the Bible's false because the Bible says it has a beginning.
Exactly. So if you actually look at science and you're looking at it without your bias, without a bias, you got to come to the conclusion that a creator or an intelligent mind was involved with that. And you mentioned that earlier with the cosmological argument, as you do in a lot of these conversations. They don't do that because they think if they say I don't know, it automatically negates what we just said about God, about God doing it, or not God doing it, but God saying in the beginning, let there be light, and then light came. You know what I mean? Let the animals come bring forth, let the birds bring forth, let the ground bring forth, or whatever. You know what I mean? So I don't know, his whole mind and the thing that he's arguing is completely flawed. It's not even a God at the gaps he's arguing no more at this point. At this point, it looks like he's in a different subject.
Yeah, he's just, well, the thing is a lot of people like to straw man us and say that we all think exactly the same way. We're all viewing this in these false ways or whatever. But the biggest thing with the thing that I don't like is when people try to act like everything's about Genesis when when everything really in the whole Bible is directed to be about Jesus. And so I feel like this is a way that a lot of atheists, they don't want to talk about Jesus. They don't want to talk about the New Testament. Instead, they'll focus on some activities in the Old Testament that they scorn with their morally relativist views. Have no, I mean, you know what I mean? So he's trying to direct all this attention to Genesis, really moving it away from the focus that we're focused on as Jesus' resurrection. If Jesus didn't resurrect, this whole thing doesn't matter at all.
True. The Bible calls these people fools, by the way, in the book of Psalms. He says the fool says in his heart that there is no God.
Hey, you know what? I think G-Man, what we should do is maybe we should ask people if they have a couple of questions, and we should just move on from David because he's about to end. This is his ending pretty much, and then Frank Turek's going to come back.
All right.
I'm gonna stop sharing this for a second. Okay, so I'm going to the chat now, you guys.
Ashley, by the way, Ashley, this made my day. Thank you for showing me this guy. This guy is the gift that keeps on giving. Definitely.
Yeah,
this guy's hilarious.
Okay, so I can see the chat a lot better right now. So if anyone has questions, thoughts, ideas, comments you would like me to read for you, if you want me to say something about what you're thinking about this, I see some pretty good people in there. I see Ronan and Gavin and Ken and Susan. So thank you, everybody.
One Way's out there too, I see.
Oh, and One Way. Oh, and Isaiah Braxton. So thank you guys for coming on in here. So,
yeah, one day you got to get One Way Apologetics in here. One day. He's an interesting character. You know, he likes to talk about this stuff too.
One Way Apologetics?
Yeah, I think that's One Way Apologetics.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure. I got to click on this thingy and see. I'll check it later, but I think that's him.
Oh, and Nathan, do we not see the atheist points of view at all? Nathan, it's a really hard thing for me to talk about atheists because I've never been one. So it's really hard for me to understand the atheist point of view, I have to admit. G-Man, what about you? Have you ever been an atheist?
No, I've never been an atheist, and I can't think that way, the way they think about things and subjective. Because if I argue the way they argue, I'm too honest to sit there and say that I believe morality is subjective and then start judging everyone objectively. I can't do that. You know what I mean? If I believe that morality is subjective, then guess what? I'm gonna say, you want to know what? There is no such thing as right or wrong, and then go about my business. You live your life, I live my life. I can't argue the way they argue because there's a lot of, and I mean a lot of bias and dishonesty going on with them. It's really hard to think and understand the way they do. Now, there are some nicer atheists that have some interesting stories where I can understand why they might have the attitude that they have. Like you'll talk to some of them and they'll be like, my mom and my dad forced me to go to church, and they treated me like, you know what I mean? Then some of them will just be mad at God and become atheists that way. For that, I understand to a certain degree.
Yeah, well, that's David Silverman. He said his parents forced him to go to a bar mitzvah, and he had to get up there in front of everybody and say he believed in God, and he didn't like that because he didn't believe in God, and so he felt like he had to lie. I want to say Ronan saying faith is an emotion, or what is it if hope is in Hebrews 11:1. I want to say throughout the Bible it says we are supposed to test any knowledge that comes in. We're supposed to make sure that we search for evidence and we look deeply into the truth. And so faith is not just, it's evidence based. So
yeah, definitely.
Say that. Who
It's
talks
not
about
based
the
on a
spaghetti
blind
monster?
faith. There's more than one definition for faith, and Aaron Raw found out the hard way when he took on inspiring philosophy.
Yeah.
I understand what blind faith is. Blind faith is, you hear, I'll say, SJ, guess what, SJ? You're married to Big Bird and everybody believes it. That's blind faith. You know what I mean?
There are some people who, there are some people who believe blindly. I can say there are definitely some people who don't really do any investigation. That's certainly true, but I'm not one of them. And I know you're not either. Right.
Biblical faith involves exactly what you're talking about. We look at the natural world. We look at, as a matter of fact, okay, in the beginning, you might hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, and then the Spirit of God will convict you about like what the Bible says about Christ, and then you'll believe it. But after that, you're still investigating. You're being like the Bereans. You're going back to the Bible and you're looking at the historicity of Jesus. You're looking at secular sources. You're looking at a lot of different things to see who Jesus was, how he impacted the world, and all of those things. That's not a person who hears it and just believes it because somebody said it. That's the person that's going out there who heard it, studies it, lives it. You know what I mean? And is putting it into practice.
Yeah, I want to say Nathan is also asking a lot about what if the evidence leads you to atheism or leads you away from God. I honestly have to say the more I've read on this and the more evidence I've looked for, the closer I've come to God. And I've read lots of atheist books. I've read Bart Ehrman's work. I've read Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris. I've read their books and they're garbage. I mean, I think somebody told me that the best atheist arguments were coming from Bertrand Russell. So I read his thing called Why I'm Not a Christian. And that was the first atheist information I read. And I thought to myself, this is horrible. This is what they have. Basically, the big argument is the argument against evil. But in their atheistic position, if there is no good and evil, essentially, we're all just cosmic accidents, and you can't condemn people because you're speaking relatively.
Right. And they kind of shot themselves in the foot when they brought up the whole subjective argument. That's why you'll run into some atheists that argue that morality is objective, which is funny because they'll say that they'll say that morality is objective. I know yesterday you told me that Steve McRae was an objectivist, right?
Yeah.
And Steve McRae will say he's an objectivist while arguing like a subjectivist. He'll argue like a subjectivist while saying that he's an objectivist. Me and Steve McRae has gone into it a couple of times regarding that particular topic.
Yeah, no, I think Brian, Brian Stevens is asking about, he says, wait, let me phrase it exactly how he said it here. What if the evidence leads you away from God? Yeah, Brian, I didn't want to go read Bertrand Russell. I had an atheist challenge me. He said that if I read Bertrand Russell, he would read the book I recommended, which was Mere Christianity. And so we both read the books. And I was actually kind of scared at first when I read it, because I thought, oh my gosh, this is their best. I wonder what they're going to say. Could it shake my faith? And when I read it, I almost started laughing because I thought, this is awful. I mean, these are not good arguments against God. And I think the big problem is people don't understand why there's evil in the world. In the debate right here with David Silverman, he brings up, what about babies with cancer? Why would God allow a baby to have cancer? And I think it's just the idea that God, this is like a testing grounds, essentially, where we strengthen our spirits. And Jesus embodies that whole thing when he carried the cross. And so he was, I mean, you wonder why. I always think to myself, now, why was Jesus, right after he was baptized, why did he go in the woods for 40 days and fast and allow the Satan to tempt him? And you realize throughout the Bible, anytime people fast, they become spiritually extremely strong. And so he fasted for 40 days. Satan was given full on, hey, I'm going to try to tempt you. He couldn't do anything. So Jesus proved himself as sin-free, without sin, and you can't tempt him. And so he became very strong in the next 3 years. Obviously, Satan was following them all around. And then he was uniquely qualified to die for our sins because he didn't have any sins. So
I would meet that question with this question. From an atheistic worldview, why is a baby having cancer a bad thing? If we're nothing but a bunch of a bunch of cells that are eventually going to die and be fertilizer later.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's another thing that Christianity's brought about, is this whole value of individuals. In the times when Jesus came about, a lot of people would leave their babies out to be exposed because they didn't feel like taking care of them, especially if they were females. And so Jesus taught the value of all people. And that's where we even got this idea of all men are created equally, endowed by their creator. And so that came about from Christianity.
Somebody in a live chat by the name of Nathan says this. He says, I want to believe, but the evidence isn't good enough for me. So what do I do? Do what S.J. Thomason did. Go study, go look at the evidence for the resurrection. Oh, not only is that evidence good enough for you, but it's going to be hard for you to refute any of it. Go look at the resurrection evidence. You know what I mean? It was good enough for Lee Strobel.
Yeah, go look at the evidence. And I've got this book right in front of me right now that I'd recommend, Nathan. Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Okay, it's by Sean and Josh McDowell. I've got tons and tons of little sticky pads in here marking really interesting insights from these guys. This is well worth your while. Go buy this book if you haven't bought it yet. I mean, there's so much evidence in here. You'll be blown away. And they did a really detailed study. There's tons of sources, lots of good information. So, yeah.
And then Nathan, why don't you come on here one day after you actually read that book and tell us what your opinion is, and actually put some bookmarks in it and tell us all about it.
You met Nathan. He has been on the thing with us.
Okay.
No, I'd have Nathan on. I'll chat with Nathan if oh, you've read that book. That wasn't convincing to you, Nathan? Okay, then I'll have to give you some more. Here, read this.
Tell me, read A Case for Christ.
This is the Bible. So, yeah, A Case for Christ is good. C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Actually, that was the game changer for me. That I think, honestly, I think the Holy Spirit, right when I got to the passage about the trilemma, I feel like the Holy Spirit just sort of came down and gave me the boom, boom, epiphany. Holy cow, this is true. And so that's a deal. But anyway, all right, G-Man, should we just go ahead and change or end the stream?
Yeah, nobody's asking any other questions. You'll be on my channel next week, right?
You bet. Yeah. So you guys, if you haven't had a chance to subscribe, Veckel was here before. Subscribe to G-Man. Subscribe to Veckel. Be great. Okay.
Subscribe to S.J. Thomason.
Yeah, and subscribe here if you would. That'd be great. So
S.J. is a lot more respectful than I am, and all of you know that.
Hey, that reminds me. I'm going to be on Lori Morrow's channel tomorrow. It's called Spoon-Fed Soul. I actually won't be live though. Now that I think about it. I'm not sure when she's going to post it, but I am going to be on that one, and I'll post the link to that. And Lori Morrow, I would go to her channel too. She's a Christian apologist, female. You don't usually see too many females doing this kind of stuff, so I'd recommend going to her channel as well. And then Wednesday, I'm going to be talking about some other evidence that I've been accumulating right now, and I'm going to be talking about the Exodus and how Jesus relates to the Exodus in a lot of ways. So that'll be.
Yeah, a lot of them like to argue, SJ, that there's no evidence for the actual Exodus with the Jews leaving leaving Egypt. Why do they say that though? I guess that would be a question I would ask.
Well, I'll tell you why they say it. They say it because they're making an assumption about which Pharaoh was in office at that time. And so they're going back to records of this particular Pharaoh. And I've seen arguments by both IP and this guy called Phil that they're actually they've chosen the wrong Pharaoh and time period when they think all of this occurred. So they think that there's no evidence in that particular time period, but the evidence in the book actually points to a different Pharaoh and time period where there actually is evidence. So that's something to think about.
If you can give me a link to IP talking about that, I'd like to see it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll do that.
All right. Cool.
So, all right, well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream.
All right, you guys have a good night. Read your Bible and do what it says.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, always learning.